Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I know that you're literally joining us from the four corners of the world, whatever place and whichever place you are joining us from. We are delighted to have you with us. The topic for our conversation today is challenging hegemony in development. Before I get to that, I would like to do land acknowledgement here in Nova Scotia. We'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq people first signed with the British Crown in 1725. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized title and establishment the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. We stand here with the joy of a beautiful sunny winter afternoon and morning in Antigonish, on Mi'kmaq ancestral land, with full acknowledgement of the responsibility we have to be thankful and protect the natural world with all its beauty, and also find a way for sustainable peace and true reconciliation on this land. It is indeed the responsibility of each one of us that true and meaningful reconciliation takes root on this land. So as I said earlier, our conversation today, the topic is challenging hegemony in development. Let me put a disclaimer here. This topic was not chosen in response to a particular event happening in our world. It was planned months back. So if it happens to be in a particular time that is challenging for international development in general and development in general, that is purely coincidence. So with that, what I would like to do is call upon our fellows, which is, let me step back a little bit. This is a reflection on Passive Family Foundation, which was established 10 years ago in 2015 to provide young graduates an opportunity to explore their desire, their vision, and their insight into their community of their choosing, and to build a relationship and develop a framework that is rooted in dignity and respect of the partnership that they want to establish. That's precisely a new model of development partnership that really amplifies community ownership, participation, engagement, dignity, and respect, and most of all, equal opportunity, equal treatment of partners, not within the framework of hegemonic structure that one is the dominant structure and the other is actually following up that structure. So with that, we are pleased to have 5 fellows here. Lil Burger from McGill University, Radia Daliwal from Carleton University, Chama Lasase from McGill University, Shona Moreau, McGill University, Chidra Onigbole from Carleton University, and Damai Sialagan from Queen's University. I would like to go introduce them one by one, but I have decided that if they talk about themselves, where they are at the moment, what they wanted to do, and what really interests them in this framework would be more justice than me talking about them. So I would like to give each one of them an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then eventually we will go back to the presentation part of their role. So let me begin with the furthest to me, which is Damai, Indonesia, and then we will go our way to Johannesburg, Edmonton, and to other participants. Damai, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. So yeah, my name is Damai. Thank you for having me here with the rest of my cohort. I'm doing my initiative in Lake Toba, Sumatra, Indonesia. At this moment, I'm actually in Malaysia while I'm waiting for some administrative things to be sorted out. But I'll be going back hopefully sometime soon. And my initiative really centers a lot around digital capacities and digital disparities in my community of Tutuksiado.
Thank you. Thank you, Damai. Shauna, Johannesburg, you are?
Yes, hi, Dagafi. Hi, everyone. My name is Shona Moho, she, L pronouns. I'm currently in Johannesburg, South Africa. It is where I was born. It's also where my project is. So my Pathy initiative specifically is looking at supporting refugees and asylum seekers coming to South Africa from various areas of the continent, and specifically assisting them with getting legal recognition as well as legal rights.
Thank you, Shona. Ravia? Edmonton.
Hi, I'm Ravia. I am in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I am working with senior Punjabi women and we can talk a bit more about how my project has been shaped, but we're doing socialization and education groups currently.
Thank you, Ravia. Chidera?
Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Chidera, and my initiative is based in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And I am focused on supporting the Black community in Ottawa with accessible hair care. So we're focused on addressing racial disparities in hair services, the lack of visibility for Black-owned businesses that specialize in Black hair care, and of course, addressing the impacts of hair discrimination as a result of Eurocentric beauty standards that are very prevalent in society. So my initiative takes a really strong focus on empowerment, of course, connecting the community. And for that, we're launching a citywide, and hopefully it'll expand to countrywide, Black hair care directory that any user can use for free to locate Black hair care services near them. We've also got a really strong social media page where we share tips, inspiration, product recommendations, just to support people in their natural hair care journeys. And of course, we're also trying to have a strong mental wellness integration. For that, I am trying to subsidize psychotherapy certification for local Black hair businesses. And psychotherapy is essentially a program that helps train Black business owners, people who come in contact with Black hair, of course, in how to integrate mental health, some subtle mental health care practices into their services. So it's sort of a bridge between hair care and mental health. Yeah.
Thank you, Chidera. We all are aware of that over the last few decades, international development and development in general have encountered greater scrutiny, both from conceptual and theoretical framework and practical implementation point of view. Climate emergency, unjust economic order, and deeply polarizing and polarized political discourse all presented challenge, demanding a new approach, and through interrogation of development, specifically its impact on the natural world, inclusion, social cohesion, peace and security of the local and global community.
So I'm Shama. My initiative is called Iswi, which is a Tmazirt word. Tmazirt is it's one of the indigenous languages that we have in northern Morocco, specifically Rif Tmazirt. And Iswi means purpose/ambition. It's like this purpose meeting ambition, and the whole initiative has to do with youth success and dropout prevention. So we are working with youth that is struggling with school and that is at a high risk of abandoning school, using alternative methods such as play-based learning, gamification, and coaching, mindset coaching, whatnot. And it's going really well. We are supporting at the moment about 35 kids. 4 of them that we're supporting individually nearly daily, and the other ones as part of a group. And we're expanding. It's going pretty well. That's it.
Good to see you, Chama. Let me go back to Damai, to your question, the question posed to you earlier. How is your initiative contributing to those ideas we talked about: climate emergency, peace, security, inclusion, dignity, and respect for that matter? So how do you see that?
Well, initially, when I was ideating my project before applying, I was really interested on the cultural sides of work in my community. So like a lot of things around cultural preservation and promoting histories and that kind of thing. And eventually I kind of came to where I am now, largely because I realized the most effective way to promote culture, to promote history and whatnot, was really by equipping the people there with the skills to be able to do that themselves. And in my case, a lot of it comes down to just basic infrastructure to be able to be digital consumers and digital producers. And so, just speaking for myself, when I was in university, I studied history and development. And when I was trying to learn about the histories of my people, there was really no resources available online, at least no resources produced by the people themselves in a way that I could access as someone who, mainly speaks English in Canada. And so really for me, that's where it came from. But what I will say is that, in my opinion, especially when we're thinking about the future of development in a general sense, I'm very interested in, like I mentioned, culture and social vectors of this kind of work. But in my view, the ecological, environmental sides of it as well are inextricable from those kind of things. And so when we talk in the Canadian context, for example, about indigenizing or decolonizing development, I do truly believe that in the process of promoting and empowering and things like Indigenous resilience and resurgence, that's not just about the culture, not just about society, but also about returning some of the kind of epistemic relationships to the land into the development space.
Thank you, Damai. Thank you. Let me go to Shauna. The same question for you.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. So I think Damai has already said a lot on all of that, but specifically, at least in my context, I think that a way that I've been really trying to practice, I guess you could say, trying to rethink a bit the way development works, and that engagement aspect is really much more through the relationships we have with each other, with the organizations we work with the community we're working in, those kind of things, and really trying to not lead, I guess, is really kind of thing, but more support and help them build what they are. So I think a couple of us have already used the word empowerment and when talking about our initiatives, and I think that's really kind of the idea of like, how do we try to rethink power dynamics within communities? And of course, we're all coming within our communities from different backgrounds, from different placements, and things of that kind. So it's kind of how do we make sure, and we're quite aware of when we're approaching a community member or a partner or things like that, how do we make sure that at the end of the day, specifically the community member is the one who has, you could say, the reins of power and is able to lead the initiative where they think fits them best. And it's kind of making sure that there's not just this one model. I must say that I'm specifically in a situation where it's quite person by person. So it's not like one huge thing that we kind of place on everyone because it's much more legal service based. So it's really about trying to talk with them and making sure that they know exactly what are the options in front of them and how they want to kind of take hold of their situation and navigate it, and what are the best ways we can support them. So I feel like that aspect of just really spending time in relationship, sometimes it's not just about giving legal services, sometimes it's about listening and trying to understand where they're coming from. And then supporting them when they ask for it, and making sure that you are there to support them in whatever they're trying to do. So
let me stay for a few seconds with you, Shauna. You're working in a country where the legacy of apartheid, that power structure we talk about, hegemony, was to say the least, in some ways inhuman. So in post-apartheid Africa, South Africa, when you're working now, what really how do people see power dynamics? How do they see order and structure and those kind of things. Any observations?
Well, I feel like, and of course, contextualizing myself, I'm a foreigner, I'm a white woman living in South Africa. Yes, I was born here, and yes, I do have connections to this country, but I also come from a very different aspect, I would say, than a lot of my clients and even a lot of the organizations I'm working with. So I think that post-apartheid South Africa has a lot of advocacy-based work. A lot of people have really worked throughout apartheid and now in free democratic South Africa that we are now living in, have really utilized the tools from back then to make sure to keep pushing their rights and making sure that there's no at all, you could say, stop to developing and making sure that the promises of the Constitution are not just words and that they actually are going to be implemented. And so I think that aspect specifically of people are much more aware of their rights, are much more aware of their history, and very much, I think, are willing to step in and take the reins. But sometimes there's just, I think, a need of support or legal support or just tools to be able to do it. Because for so long in this country, of course, those things were robbed from people in a sense that, you know, the laws wouldn't even recognize certain people as being fully human and things of that kind. So I think it's really interesting working as a lawyer in this context, because though we're trying to make the law, you know, you could say a access for people to be able to have a full and complete and dignified life, we can't forget that it's been used as a tool of suppression and oppression for so many years in this history. And so a lot of our work sometimes is also just making sure that people realize that when they come to us, so when we're working with them, that we're not going to, you know, they're not going to be completely kicked out of the country and all that for wanting legal rights, that there is a dignity and they are allowed to take them on and realize that they do deserve the plenary of rights that are accorded to them for just being human and being here. And so I think a part of our work is really sometimes just making sure that people feel comfortable and realize that they have power in not only declaring themselves, but also engaging with the legal structure here, and making sure also that when we tell them that it's true, by protecting them when needed in situations where maybe some people are less likely to try to protect those rights. Because unfortunately, for all the greatness I think South Africa has, there's still a lot of xenophobia in this country.
Thank you, Shona. The different faces of the law, oppressive law and just law. That's the framework Shona is working from. Chidera, let me go to Ottawa. Can you reflect on the same question, please?
Yeah, for sure. So if I forgot to mention, my initiative is called Links to Locks. So if you hear me say Links to Locks, I'm referring to my initiative. So Links to Locks addresses systemic barriers. We're essentially working to push back against the erasure of Black hair care from the mainstream beauty industry. But instead of taking an approach that's based in like institutional intervention, we're working towards prioritizing community action. So obviously at an institutional level, the certification process for hairstylists in Ontario, it doesn't mandate training on natural Black hair textures. And that is somewhere at the center of the greater issue of erasure of Black hair care from the mainstream. But instead of addressing the institutional aspects of it, I'm focusing more on how we can bring together existing service providers in the community and how we can connect the community to those service providers by really prioritizing visibility. So our social media really focuses on promoting who's already out there. And the interesting thing is, as I've been doing this work, I've realized that it seems as though there's only 1-2 people in the city that can do your hair if you're a Black person looking for like hair care on your natural hair. But in reality, a lot of the most competent services, they're not they're not certified by the government. We'll say it like that. They're not certified by the Ontario Hairstyling Certification Program. Now, of course, it wouldn't be helpful for them to be certified if the main clientele they're working for or working with are not covered in their training. So I haven't been prioritizing services that are certified over services that are uncertified. And I think that's one really good example of challenging hegemony in my initiative. But yeah, I'm really just focusing on how to bring together the community and how to highlight existing people in the community. I'm trying to put a really good focus on economic justice and economic growth within our Black community. I'm trying to lead people in the community, not just to Black hair care providers, but local Black hair brands that offer products. And all of that contributes to economic growth. So there's so many different ways that Links to Locks is trying to challenge, some of these more traditional top-down approaches to development. And yeah, it's been really good so far. Super receptive in the community.
Let me quickly follow up with what you said. There are people out there, perhaps, say hair care, hair care, racial injustice, economic injustice. So they may not take it seriously that hair care is not really socially a primary issue in social justice and so on and so on. How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, for me, the way I originally thought about it was, anybody else in the society who's looking to get their hair done can simply go on Google and find a service that works for them. And many people in the Black community don't have that, what you would call luxury, I guess. And I think it's, yeah, it might be a little bit of an inconspicuous injustice, but it's the whole process and the whole idea of, Black people looking for a very simple everyday service and consistently being turned away from businesses, yeah, to many people, hair might not be the main focus of social justice, but there is no place that a Black person should enter where they're turned away simply because they're Black. And, hair might, like I said, be inconspicuous, but it's just as important. So yeah, that's usually how I would respond.
Thank you. Within the larger context of injustice, the larger context of domination, the larger context of beauty, how it's defined and who defines it. Let me go to Lil. The same question for you.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I apologize for my technological difficulties. I'm Lil. I'm in Jojage, also known as Montreal. And for context, I'm doing a project where I'm trying to help figure out how McGill students and students in general can become more active members of the community right beside McGill, specifically vis-a-vis the large presence of homelessness and the large homeless community in that neighborhood, and figuring out how those relationships can be built and how this community can be strengthened so that there are ties and relationships and positive interactions between all the players. So for this question, I think that the main thing I've been learning that differentiates what I'm doing from, I was a political science student, from a lot of the international development projects that I learned about that were not usually positive, is that it's really not about creating anything new. It's just about strengthening what a community is already doing. And that anyone coming in that wants to help and that wants to solve social problems, you don't have the solutions. The community has the solutions. You may have resources and you may have guidance in a way that can help community members activate the solutions that they want to and are already doing better. But you're not going to bring in a new system, and that's going to be what helps. You can help a community better actualize the systems they want and need, but it's really that difference of what you're going in with, what your resources are, and the fact that the plan and the vision and all of that is the community's resource and is not yours. And if you think that it's yours, it's not going to work out well.
Lil, your initiative is in Montreal, Canada, and people are joining us from different parts of the world in this forum. And this kind of initiative is not people think about when they think about Canada. Canada, the G7 country, rich country, very stable, very. If people ask you why are homeless people in this country, how would you respond to that?
Yeah. It's like everyone in society has agreed that we need to make sure that these basic services are provided to everyone. And yet, there's a group of people where it isn't working. They aren't being supported in those services and those basic needs. And everyone isn't sure why, isn't sure what the gap is, that like these services are there, but there's a group of people who aren't being served. And so now there is just a huge gap for them, and everyone's trying to play catch up in understanding how the quality of life that's been guaranteed for everyone else is not being guaranteed for one group of the population, which is really an interesting and nuanced and complex reasons as to why. But the social issue then becomes it's not fair to be giving this to everyone else and not successfully be giving it to this community. And it is on the government and it's on service providers to figure out what the gap is there in that provision and in that support that's resulting in a percentage of the population not being supported the way everyone else is.
Thank you, Lil. Let's go to Morocco. Chama.
Hi, everyone. So regarding how I'm thinking about development and redefining it, I have to give you a bit of context first. So in the case of ISWI, it started about 4 years ago when I was traveling to this city. Nador is not exactly where I'm from. I was invited by a family member into a small town near Nador. A small town here is called a Douar, so I'm going to use this word a lot. And then I was spending about 3 weeks there, and there I met a 10-year-old child who wanted to leave school. So this was right after COVID, and I was floored because originally I'm a teacher, right? And 10 years old, an age for wanting to leave school for me has been, or until then, had been unheard of. So I was very shocked, and with the 3 weeks that I had there, I decided to do something about it. And then I did a little bit of a summer camp situation where the kids of the Douar would be participating into this summer camp and hopefully be motivated about school again. Then while working with those kids, I realized that Douar had like a bit of a generational issue with school abandonment for many systemic reasons. One of them, they're super far away from school. Another one is just that there are alternatives to school, agriculture, etc. And it's not about the importance of school, but rather the risks of abandoning school so young. Drugs, illegal migration into Spain, which is deadly, like you swim, you know what I mean? And so it's a bit complicated in terms of the risks that are very real when you do leave school. So what happened is that summer of 2021, the summer camp was so successful that one of the people of the community, Siham, who has a bit of a role in politics, came to see me and she said, you know, it would be cool if we could do this like full time, all the time, so that nobody drops out anymore. I said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So then every summer we were thinking like, how do we make this sustainable? How do we make this sustainable? And then last summer, there was the Patty Fellowship call for applications. And then I applied with my community and we got it. And so all of this to tell you is that our initiative is grassroots. It's about a community coming together, wanting to get rid of the school abandonment issue where it was quite dire in this case. And now that we have funding from the Patty Fellowship, and now that we are able to dedicate 1 year, instead of doing this only in the summer, we're doing this full time. The issue that I'm thinking about when I hear the question of development is how do we move from grassroots to something more institutionalized, let's say, or something more official, where we are able to sustain the initiative and secure more funding. I will say the beautiful thing about grassroots initiative, they're also community-based and asset-based, is that they like everybody's really motivated at the beginning. So there's a momentum that gets built, people are excited about it. But then you face real challenges where like people have jobs, you know, so they don't have time necessarily to leave everything behind and focus on this because we are not guaranteed future funding ever, right? So it was a bit challenging to come in as a community and sustain the effort over time, but we work together. We've been a bit adaptable. So right now it's time to strategize for a long-term sustainability plan. But the cool thing about the Pathy Fellowship being a one-year program, and it's not just about funding, it's also about learning how to do this type of work as a community, is that we also have time to carefully think about what model we want to pursue so that we make the best decision possible for our collective efforts. Yeah.
Thank you, Chama. I'll come back to the sustainability issue later on, and we will discuss that. Ravia, let me go to Edmonton. It's early in the morning in Edmonton. I suppose it's cold. Can you reflect on the same question?
Absolutely. I think a lot of what everyone has said definitely applies to my initiative. So I'm working with senior women, Punjabi women, which is like, I guess, a language speaking group, just because there isn't programming anywhere in the city that does like Punjabi, Hindi, or Urdu programming, which are languages that are all spoken in my group, and everyone, like I would say mutually intelligible, but I don't know if that's the official term. But those are the languages that are spoken in the group, and that's how everyone communicates. And having that group is really, like Shama was saying, there is that a lot of like momentum in the beginning stages of having a group that is, really grassroots, figuring out what development means for a group in a context where we're trying to make it like really participant led has been really interesting. So acknowledging that the knowledge I have is really different and coming from a really different place than like the wisdom and cultural knowledge, but also even like institutional knowledge for the women I work with, and trying to bring those all together has been really interesting. And as for redefining development, I think trying to center participant voices has been a process. So speaking to all of the participants and trying to like really capture what they want, it has been something that isn't done in like one day. So it's like a iterative process that's happening like every time we meet, every time we chat. So yeah, that is how I would say we're working on redefining like that part of development, perhaps.
Well, the role of wisdom, the wisdom of this world in development is a very key point you touched on. I'll come back to you on that one. Next question, Shauna. When we begin international development, with development in general, we develop a framework, we write proposals, so on and so forth. We have detailed worked out on paper, and then we go to the actual work. What do you see from your proposal on paper and when you hit the ground in Johannesburg? Is there any discrepancy? Is there any challenge you are facing, the conceptual framework you have developed and the practical aspect of it?
Sorry, did you say Shana or Shona?
You, Shauna.
Perfect. No, so I think that as we've kind of all mentioned, our initiative has changed a lot from the beginning. There's a lot of ideas, I think, when you're discussing with people, when you have a lot of energy, and also when you feel like you have a lot of time, that you're just kind of, you have this whole idea, you have a plan, and you almost, I know that I'm an over-organizer, so I can, plan myself by the minute if you give me the opportunity to. But then you realize kind of things happen, people's lives happen, grants happen, all these different elements are playing within your initiative, and it kind of makes it that you have to realize sometimes that even with all the plans that you have to be so flexible to the needs, because it's going to change every week, every day, every month. Sometimes you think you're going to court, and you're ready to support your client in arguing and pleading the case, and then you realize the judge is sick and they're just not going to show up, and so it's going to be, you know, pushed back to another 3 months. And so I think a big part of, especially I find my job here in South Africa has been trying to just really be more flexible than I usually am, in the sense of just trying to be problem solvers when things come, trying to figure out and communicate with your clients on like what's the best way forward. These are best options we know right now. Do you think of anything? How can we go forward? And at the end of the day, what's the goal? Are we still on the same goal? Is there other things are we trying to seek? And I think Rav kind of talked a bit about it, but that idea of almost daily checking ins, it doesn't mean I'm calling my clients every day, but more in the sense of like making sure that we're on the same page and that we're still kind of advancing towards what we had discussed. Or do we feel like life happened and we need to now rethink a bit how we want to go about? And so in the larger framework of proposals and thinking and all that, I think my experience has just really shown me that things take much more time than you expect it to be. Relationships take much more time to establish, and trust and dignity is not created, you know, and fostered in one day. It's something that you have to take time to do. And if you don't take time to do that, then things can happen that are kind of, you could say, do the opposite of what you're trying to do.
Flexibility and adjustment. Chidera, the same question for you.
Yeah, so the question was how are conceptual and proposed realities reconciling, contradicting? Yeah.
When you go to the practical aspect of it and what you have written on paper and on the ground, what are the challenges and realities you are observing?
Yeah. So there have been quite a few unexpected shifts in the initiative. Originally, I had planned Links to Locks to focus a little bit more specifically on the Ottawa Black youth community. So being a Black youth myself, I sort of understood the complexities of being, you know, a student with lower income and also being new to the city and not having many connections to find Black hair care. But now I'm seeing a really big shift towards the greater community. I think naturally, when I launch a Black hair care directory, that's not just going to be helpful for students, it's going to be helpful for everybody. But I'm also shifting all of the other aspects of my initiative to be supportive of the general community, regardless of age. I've also noticed some partnership-driven changes and I guess expansions in the initiative. So right now I'm collaborating with the Ottawa Coalition to End Violence Against Women. And in December, we did a really successful fundraiser for their Black hair care drive for Black survivors of gender-based violence. So because of that partnership, now we're looking into doing a pop-up hair salon that will be entirely free for Black survivors. So we'll be able to make contact with women's shelters and other survivor supporting networks to offer free hair care. And so that's sort of taken an initiative in the direction of supporting Black survivors. And that wasn't originally in the plans, but it's been such an impactful direction. It's making huge impacts on the community. I'm also partnered with Future Black Female, and Future Black Female recently got some grant funding for economic growth for Black women and girls. So because of that partnership, I'm able to bring in a new program that is currently in development where we're focusing on equipping Black women and girls with entrepreneurial skills in the Black hair care space. So we're hoping to add to the available services for Black members of the community by going to, you know, of course, Black women and girls with existing skills and talents. And again, that wasn't an original direction for Links to Locks, but it's a new opportunity that came from this new partnership, and it's been wonderful. I think some of the challenges have been reconciling between scalability and a deep impact. So, of course, when I originally had the idea for the Black Hair Care Directory, I wanted to start it in Ottawa, but make sure it expands out around Canada. But I've realized that to do something like that would require quite a few more eggs in the directory basket and take a little bit of attention away from some of the local events I'm trying to do. So yeah, of course, there's tension between wanting to expand, but wanting to make sure everything I'm doing locally is meaningful and profound for the community. I've taken a little bit of a step back on the directory. We're going to keep it really local to begin with. It's going to be available just for Ottawa, so that I can also balance doing some events in the community. So other than the pop-up hair salon for Black survivors, I'm also looking on doing a subsidized pop-up hair salon for Black students at Carleton University. And of course, the economic growth program is going to be a big focus as well. Yeah, we're balancing.
Thank you. Thank you, Shajara. Damai, let me come back to you. Any insights?
Yeah, well, in my experience anyway, I feel like the things that change the most from the planning to the implementation are never the things you expect to change. Now, in my case, my initiative is actually remarkably similar to my original proposal. And right now, what I'm doing mostly, what I'm focusing on is developing a digital hub and an accompanying sort of regional governance board to kind of direct digital strategy in the future after the end of this term. And that's very similar to what I wrote in my proposal. But I think the thing that maybe a lot of people wouldn't see there is all the kind of, pit stops I made along the way and exploring and kind of considering different ways that I can think about my project and approach it. And it just so happened in my case that it sort of looped back around to some of the earlier ideas, but often that's not the case. What I will say though is I think, first of all, in terms of that kind of adaptability in the general scheme of the initiative, it's kind of very important, which I think Lil was talking about earlier, to be able to meet people where they are in the community. I mean, in my case, I had initially anticipated working a lot with entrepreneurs in the tourism industry because those were the people that, through my own kind of assessments, I had identified as one of the major groups who would be interested in engaging with kind of new digital technologies in the case of, entrepreneurial ventures. And in my mind, those people were, middle-aged parents, mostly fathers in this case. But as I kind of, went throughout this project, I realized that a lot of them just don't really care that much, or they're like, leave it to the younger generation. And that kind of led me down toward focusing on youth, which seems to be a common theme actually in our cohort. But again, like that was just me following what I was being told and what I was kind of seeing in the case of, the way that I thought about my initiative. But really, what Shona was talking about before, I think it's the day-to-day adaptability that is the most important in this kind of work in general. In my case, I don't know if anyone here has really been to North Sumatra, but my people really like to have a lot of ceremonies and like to have a lot of celebrations. And maybe this is just me, but they don't like to tell me when these things are happening. So I'll wake up one day and be like, okay, come down to the church. We're going to be doing this for 6 hours. I'm like, okay, wasn't expecting that. I kind of had other things on the schedule, but in these kind of cases, it's about the community at the end of the day. And so you have to be able to adapt and, kind of follow the flow of the community and all the different things that go on. You can't just kind of try to power through and get your own way all the time.
Thank you, Damai. What I will do is I will give an opportunity to you, Damai, Shauna, Ravia, and Chama, because the question I'm about to pose is particularly focused on you, on four of you. There's this concept of diaspora, that diaspora being returning back to the country of origin, the country of ancestral land, so on and so forth. You presume that you know everything because you have the cultural understanding, so on and so forth. But when you hit the ground, things might be different, that what you think you knew might be shifted already, changed direction, the dynamics have changed. So let me go to you, Shauna. You were born in Johannesburg. You grew up in Canada. You go back assuming that you know your community. What is your reflection on that?
Yeah, I think, everyone kind of has such multifaceted backgrounds and things of that kind. And I wouldn't say I'm the exception to that either. I think something specifically just in my context is, yes, I was born in South Africa. Yes, I was here for 10 years of my youth. But I was never South African. I was born to foreign parents who immigrated here for university in the end of the 90s, right at the end of the apartheid regime. And so because of that, even though I've always been tied to South Africa, I've always been a bit of an outsider. And I think maybe that's why immigration has always been something that I've always really felt, because community and people who are moving, to different places that are maybe not their home per se, and trying to integrate into new environments has kind of always just been a reality of mine. And specifically what I'd like to maybe encapsulate on coming back to South Africa. When I went to law school, I knew that a huge part of why I was doing that was just because I'd grown up in a post-apartheid South Africa in this, you could say, group that we call, which was kind of dubbed the Rainbow Nation. And this idea is that within our schools, within our education, this idea of civil action and support and advocacy was almost like ingrained into us. And so whenever I had the possibility of coming back to South Africa, so in like 2015, as well as last year, I always would connect with some organizations that my friends were working with or that were just doing extremely cool stuff, and had the opportunities to kind of, you could say, reconnect with that part of me that's maybe not completely a part of me. And that's how like I kept, I guess you could say, that connection. And what's been interesting and different is like every time I came, I always felt, like, okay, like, yes, I understand this, I'm understanding this. And every time I'd also be humbled every time I came back, because even just last year when I was here and I was working with an amazing organization called Lawyers for Human Rights, who works with refugees, but also on a bunch of other advocacy work and projects here in South Africa. The realities that, we had observed and last year have changed. Certain things, certain institutions have become more strict, less strict. The public sentiment about certain things, such as immigrants, have also shifted. And so no matter, I think, how close you feel or how you feel like you've studied this, you've worked in this, there's always some humbleness, I think, that you always have to approach a community, no matter how much you know or you think you know about them, because dynamics are going to change, and especially dynamics are changing without you in them when you're away. So trying to keep a thumb on the pulse can always be a bit hard, but I think it's also how you learn, and it makes the work more interesting because you always have to be making that effort. You can't just take things for granted.
Thank you, Shauna. Chama, did you have a romantic view of going back to Morocco?
I idealized it a little bit more than necessary, but it's okay. So I'm Moroccan. I was born here, and we immigrated to Canada when I was 9, and then we came back when I was 13, and then we went back when I was 15, and then ever since then, every summer I spend here. I cannot spend a summer elsewhere physically, but I mean I could, but it's just not the same. So coming back to launch ISWI together with my community. Um, it's a bit tricky because how do I express it best? It's been challenging a little bit in terms of administrative roadblocks because I don't necessarily understand the system very well, given that I grew up in Canada. But that's okay. Understanding the nonprofit sector, understanding the local administrative landscape, all of these things are going to take time. And that's also the beautiful thing about being a community-based grassroots initiative. It's that whatever I cannot do, somebody else can do it with me. I'm learning at the same time, and we're really playing to our strengths. Honestly, I'm mostly contributing to the education effort, let's say, in the program leading and the strategy with the youth along with the other educators in my community. And then whenever we need to go knock on some administrative doors, I never go by myself because I couldn't do it. I still need to learn. Yeah, so everybody's contributing whatever they know best.
Thank you, Chama. Damai?
I really like this question. Well, for my case, it had been 9 years actually since I'd been back to the community. And that meant in that time I'd become an adult, at least, legally speaking. And I'd gone to university, finished university, and had many other life experiences. And so I was very anxious going back because I always hear stories about people in diaspora returning to communities, and they're seen as like these greenhorns. They don't really understand anything. And it's sort of this sense of dislocation or alienation, I guess, that I'd known for so long in Canada, of course. And that was something I'd been very worried about, but I was actually, and even today, every single day, I feel very taken aback because that was not my experience at all, going back to my community. And I think really the reason why is on my end, I returned with a very acute desire to learn, right? And not just going back and being like, okay, well, why do you do things this way? I think it's better to do it this way, but really just to be there and learn. And I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. And in the same vein, not really coming with as much a sense of, hauteur, I guess, if that's the right word, but really just opening myself up to what the community has and the culture and history and everything there. And I think the other aspect of it is the community itself. In our case, there's this kind of anxiety, I think, generally speaking, about young people, where the Indonesian term people often use would be pemuda merantau, which means basically youth that leave, essentially. And it's very common for people to go, at the very least, for university, but often stay, in cities or other countries to earn a living and then come back only for retirement. And that creates this very unfortunate dynamic in community where you have a lot of kids, you have a lot of old people, but a very vital part of the community is missing. And so for me to come back, especially from Canada, that's something that people were very happy to see and something that I think a lot of people want more. So that's what I will say. But I would also like to add on this topic specifically that obviously I don't have the same experiences as someone who grew up in Canada as opposed to in the village. But I think it's important to note that people in diaspora have the same right to claim that history and the same right to claim the culture and the same right to call themselves a member of that community, which is something that I think is forgotten often because people will see someone, for example, who is a member of a particular group who grew up in a different country. And there's this sense that they're not a true manifestation or representation of that culture. And somehow they have less of a right to speak on what the stories are or what the culture is, or somehow are less of a person in that way. But in my case, I'm also mixed. And so people often will say, you're half Indonesian, you're half whatever else. But in my case, I don't think that when I'm singing or when I'm dancing in these traditional ways, it's never with half of my soul. You know what I mean? So in this case, I think when I go back, I come back obviously knowing that I don't know everything and knowing that I have certain privileges, particularly economically, going back. But I am just as much a member of the community and they see that in the same way. So that is my experience thus far.
I don't dance with half of my soul. It's full soul activity. I'm not trying to be, to impose discrimination against Chidera, Ravia, or Lel. And my assumption is you all are at home. But do you have any reflection on this question? Chidera?
Yeah, Damai, that really resonated with me. I really love that quote that when you're singing and dancing, you don't dance with half of your soul. Yeah, I'm also a diaspora person. I'm Nigerian, I'm Igbo, and I was born and raised in Canada, and I've visited quite frequently. And in fact, I just got back last month from Nigeria, and yeah, there's definitely some challenges. I think like you were saying, Shama, sometimes I romanticize it, especially with um I'd say anti-Black racism issues, because in a place where everybody looks like you, you'd think that some of those dynamics would disappear. I guess let me keep it in the context of hair. When I went in December, I I was very keen on going to a few different hair care places because I was like, oh my goodness, I sort of had an expectation that there would be quite a lot more available for natural hair care. And there was quite a few, but there's also still a very heavy emphasis on chemically straightening, relaxing, texturizing. The same Eurocentric beauty standard that's so prevalent everywhere else is very prevalent right at home in Nigeria too. Even though all of us have natural Black hair textures, we're still not embracing it wholeheartedly. Um, and in a lot of ways, I think sometimes here in general, I see a more of an emphasis on natural hair care and curly hair care and loving your curly hair. Whereas it's still very much the norm to have your hair relaxed and straightened in Nigeria. So yeah, there's definitely some romanticization that goes into it. But I'm always happy to go and see, like I said, everyone who looks like me, and yeah.
Thank you, Chidera. Home is not a singular geographic compartment. Home could be multiple place, multiple cultural realities, so on and so forth. Ravia, Edmonton. Is
Hi,
Edmonton? Yeah.
I think so I feel like I'm working in the diaspora context. So I'm working with the diaspora community, but I think it's really unique because it's a senior community who spent majority of their lives in India, and then now are living abroad. So actually within our groups, we experience a lot of um, like reflection on life, which is reflection on a life that I didn't live. Like I grew up in Canada a lot, like a lot of our fellows here. Um, but I just wanted to say something that kind of added to our conversation with you know, finding that like piece of yourself that fits into the diaspora. I think working with the seniors has made me realize like they see me as their granddaughter, they see me as an extension of the culture, the language. They get really excited because I'm working on reading and writing Punjabi, and they get really excited about that. And they think like they see that as like an extension of themselves. And like I think that's a really like I think it's such a special place for me to be, to situate myself in the community, but also realizing um like it also makes me reflect on like the life experience I have is not, like I have so much to learn from them for understanding what's the best way to do the work that we're trying to do. Um, but yeah, it's like I think it's unique in that way. But I guess speaking of diaspora context, I think so. I studied diaspora, so I could talk about this forever. But one of the things I've noticed, and one of the things that we might be working on, is actually generational differences in diaspora. So, in Canada, there is, and like this is just from an academic point of view, there's like the first wave of immigrants was more economic, family based. They've lived here since the 80s, 90s, 70s, like earlier times. This was the time when my parents immigrated. And then there are newer migrants who are moving from a different country than what my parents left in the 80s. So there is a shift in culture, slang, all of the above, that happened over the last 20, 30 years. And those differences are resulting in tensions within the community that are actually arising in my group. So the diaspora is facing these tensions with like remembering different homelands and remembering different um, values and ways of being and doing, which has shifted like some of our conversations. So some of the grandmothers that I work with that have lived here for a very long time, they'll be like, well, these young kids don't know what they're doing. Like I had to face so much racism when I came here to like survive. And then there's another part that is the younger people who are able to, express themselves, wear traditional clothes, and do all these other things. And there is there's tension in the way people are presenting themselves, like doing business, doing school. So that has been a really interesting like point of like understanding how diaspora is formed in a quote unquote host society. So those are some of the things that I'm working through right now.
Ravia, we have a lot to talk about. Diaspora is also my interest. And let me get back to you before I move to Lil. That issue you talked about, wisdom, intergenerational transmission of wisdom between grandparents, as you said, and you and the other younger generation. Can you summarize that just in 60 seconds and what your experience in that sense is?
Yeah, a part of the work that we've been doing is it's called SALT facilitation, but essentially we've been asking them questions of um, like what have you done that you were proud of, and then doing a session on that, which has been a lot of questions and like talking about their own lives and speaking of different experiences where they learned a lot about themselves. And those have been vastly different experiences, from school, academics, migration, you know, living in different contexts, living all over the world. Um, there are, like collectively, like if I'm speaking to someone, like speaking to a group of women that are all over the age of 70, like collectively there's like 300, like 10,000 years of like experience that I don't have, right? And like cumulatively, if you think about it that way. So there's a lot of like lessons that they share. And I think because, and as well to acknowledge there is the power dynamic of, like I'm a young person and there are seniors. So that's something that I've had to like face as well, in that like learning part. But when we are often having these conversations or when we talk about things like what are our dreams for our community, they're often really like steeped in like personal experience, and they feel like it almost feels like every conversation I have is like there's like a lesson somewhere in there. So I feel like I'm just being given these like pieces of like wisdom, as you were saying, that I have to like digest and like understand, and then be like, okay, how does this fit into the broader scheme of our program, or does it? I don't know. Um, yeah, that's I guess the landscape I'm working with.
Thank you, Ravia. Lil, sorry for keeping you waiting. Any reflection in Montreal?
Yeah, I can't personally speak to diaspora experience. However, I think something that could connect to the discussion of cultural identities and generational changes, especially in location, would be that the community that I'm working with most directly, which is a community that's unhoused or homeless in Montreal, in this specific neighborhood and in Montreal more generally, is majority Indigenous, so Indigenous populations from Canada. And it's been really interesting to be able to observe and learn the complexities there of a population who has not had a physical geographical change, and yet has had where they existed in completely change with like outside of their control. And specifically with communities on the street, it has been sad and fascinating to observe the like ancestry and generations of family members and communities who have existed homeless in Montreal because of the shift to a settler Canada. And that's been really interesting because I feel it may have similar themes, but is a very different context as it's been all within the same country.
Thank you. Well, let me go to Shauna again. Shauna, are you there?
I very
Shauna,
much am.
okay. One of the things we focused on initially and we reflected upon is that relationship building, development as not hegemonic structure, hegemonic framework, but relational. And relations have multiple dimensions. They have to be rooted in many things, like respect, as I feel, dignity and mutuality and interest and so on and so forth. As you go through this initiative in Johannesburg, how do you see that relationship building aspect?
I think one of the greatest gifts that the Pathy Fellowship has really given me is time. And I think time really is what fuels a relationship. I think in other contexts I've worked in, because we're so much more focused on, you could say, mass quantities and trying to get people the relief they need. We spend maybe 10 to 20 minutes trying to understand someone's situation. And then we pretty much are like, hey, this is what you have to do. Then you have to do this. Then we're going to see you here. Goodbye. And it's not that that doesn't serve its purpose. You know, I think at least in currently the Johannesburg landscape, we need a bunch of different groups and initiatives doing different things for different people. And I think at least the way that my initiative was conceptualized was really that we have this time to be able to build a relationship between me as a service provider and supporter and my client. And so the idea of being able to sit 1 hour and having tea and just discussing things like children and life and, oh, have you seen this on the news? You know, those kind of things. You don't oftentimes have the time to be able to have such a close and personal relationship with your client. And on one hand, it makes you, I think I would say, much more connected to the things that they're trying to navigate, because you have formed, you could almost say, some kind of friendship. And at the same time, I think it also allows the confidence and trust that is needed when in a vulnerable situation and navigating those really, really hard situations, that you really need to be able to bring and help someone kind of take it on and come to the other side and be able to realize they themselves have the power and the rights to be to access the life that they want and the life they deserve, and that they have dignity. And so I think not everyone, of course, is able and has the privilege to be able to work in such a space and has that luxury and pleasure of time. But I found it to be one of the most amazing aspects of work here, is to be able to take the time to get to know my clients. And I would say maybe we're not serving as many people, but I would very much bet that the quality of the work that we're doing is much better, and that people not only take it on to themselves of, hey, this is like, this person is there for me, but also they do that to other people in their community. So I've heard some of my clients who are not just giving referrals, but also saying like, hey, this is how I went about doing this, and let me help you navigate this because I navigated it and now I'm comfortable with it. And so I think there's also that aspect of empowering someone through that time and making them themselves become a leader in their community and with their friends and family. So that's the relationship aspect that I think Pathy has really given me the opportunity to explore in a way that I never have before.
Thank you. Thank you. Lil, relationship building. Do you find
Yeah.
any challenges, or how do you see that relationship building within your own work?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because my initiative is about building relationships between multiple sections of a community. So it's like relationship building in order to create relationship building, which is actually interestingly results in me kind of taking a step up of like right now the focus is the service providers and organizers that help each of those communities, having them in good relations with each other first, so that then the community that they serve can be in good relationship with each other, which requires me to be in good relationship with the organizers. It's been very interesting. I was reflecting on this a couple days ago, actually, because I really like what Shauna was saying of it being a matter of like time and just being able to be around, and that being like one of the most necessary precursors. But I also think that trust is like what people will throw around a lot as one of the most important things in relationship building. And I was reflecting on this in my community because it's really interesting to see how people who work for or work with a homeless population, the degree to which they will trust the people that they're working with. And to speak very bluntly, it like comes across in ways of, will they leave their bag unattended during a meeting? Will they trust people to be autonomous with money and give their honorariums in cash instead of by e-transfers, which aren't actually usable in a lot of contexts? Will they leave their phone on the table when they go to the bathroom? Like, it's little signs like this that show whether people that are interacting with the community trust them or not. And there's always a line of like risk and safety. I was reading a book that had the quote, I think it's like Lao Tzu, it's, if you don't trust people, they will become untrustworthy. And the opposite of that is, if you trust people, they will become trustworthy. And it's been making me think a lot about the fact that as an organizer, as someone that wants to help this community, they don't earn my trust. I need to give it freely and completely generously from the start. Otherwise, this will not work. And it's not mutual. It's not mutually reciprocal. It is, I must give my trust and trust that that will then be returned if I deserve it to be. So it's been really interesting to like see how people build that trust or not, and that specifically in this context, a lot of funders, a lot of organizers don't lead with that trust because it isn't fiscally responsible or it's too risky. But the real risk being like development projects not going well or entire communities not trusting you, that's what got us into this mess of homelessness in Canada, I believe, because service provision was not based on trust and dignity and respect. And so like the only way out of it is to lead with that. And to view that as the riskier option is, I think, a little silly, but it's also hard to unwork what you've been taught of how to treat this population. Yeah, so I think that's been the most important shift I've seen in like what I need to lead with in order to build fair relationships with this community.
Thank you, Lil. You're absolutely correct. Trust building is also about humanization, humanizing each other. You see, if we see that equal footing, regardless of our social status, our economic status, our academic status, so on and so forth, then we see eye to eye. Trust will occur within that organic process. So you are absolutely correct, and I'm grateful you are seeing it in that way. Brian, do we have questions?
Yeah, there's several here. The first one that we should address is what are the community contributions that the fellows have encountered within their communities based on their success or struggles in the past 4 months?
Who would like to take that first? Anyone? Any volunteer? Chama?
Yes, I'll take the question. So the first word that popped into my head when I heard the question was their network and their time, and also their energy, but mostly their network, because as you all know from the story that I told you earlier, we had already started, we had already like a vision in mind, and we were really excited to start. But then when we wanted to start in that first week of September, when the Patty Fellowship officially started, like the community phase of the Patty Fellowship, we realized that we needed some well-connected people to open some difficult to open doors. And so the first thing that my community contributed was their networks. We literally asset mapped our networks, and who knows who knows what. It's a small town too, so that helps. And then from there, we were able to get our first after-school program going. Aside from that, some of my community members have also contributed their time and energy in mentoring the youth. We're doing mostly dropout prevention, so we needed as many hands on deck as possible so that we could reach as many people as possible. And of course, their energy and yeah.
Johannesburg?
Yes, I was gonna say a bit in the same way that I discussed that we need to approach people and communities, even if you think you really, really know them, humbly. I think that was a big learning curve when I got here. As I had interacted with a lot of my clients. I knew the neighborhoods. I felt like I understood, you could say, the context and the landscape. And there's still situations that I found myself in that I hadn't imagined, mostly around security, I'd say. Just on the sense of not realizing exactly, how maybe other people have to navigate due to their immigration status or things of that kind. You can know something theoretically and academically, but then when you walk with them home and you realize that people are following them and things of that kind, that's a very different reality. And so I think that has been a challenge for me of trying to really try to get out sometimes of, you could say, maybe like an office kind of situation where it's much more comfortable and you can really have that relationship of client and legal support, and you kind of wear these roles and then kind of taking it out of that context and really trying to understand the full situation that the person that you're supporting lives, and trying to make sure that you are supporting them and taking cues from them on how they want to go about navigating that situation rather than your own judgments or your own kind of perception of things. And I think that's just been going more into the field, I guess. That's been a huge learning curve that I thought I was prepared for. But you're always learning new things, and you're always discovering new things about people that you thought that you knew for a very long time, and then you realize, oh my gosh, I didn't know about this whole aspect of them. So I feel that's been a very interesting aspect of my work.
Community contribution. Anyone else? Ottawa?
Yeah. So in terms of community contributions, there's been so many. I'd say one of the biggest ones would be just the contribution of community voice and engagement. So many people have interacted with Links to Locks on Instagram, or just joining the email list and stuff like that, and also spreading the word about it throughout the community. So, people are commenting and sharing, whether it's tips for how to care for your hair or a local business that we're spotlighting. And that's really helping with visibility for Black hair care businesses, which is one of the most important parts of Links to Locks. Of course, there's also professional contributions. I think there's been so many amazing Black stylists, barbers, locticians, who have been willing to, I guess, put their business out there in ways that the community can better access them through Links to Locks, but also being part of our events like the pop-up salons, being interested in donating their services to Black survivors of gender-based violence. And there's been many partnership contributions. My partnership with Octiva, which is the Ottawa Coalition to End Violence Against Women. In that, of course, I had a fundraiser to support Octiva, and almost in like a very reciprocal way, that fundraiser is funding the purchase of a whole bunch of culturally affirming hair care products that we're going to be able to put into care kits and offer survivors at the pop-up salon. So that's amazing. And the community has contributed financially quite a lot too. During the fundraiser, we surpassed a $500 goal when we raised $640. And that's with, the support of the community. There's been so much, the community offering their trust and accepting Links to Locks as like a very legitimate grassroots organization in the community has been amazing too. Yeah.
Thank you, Chidera. We are approaching an hour and a half mark. We can keep this going for the entire day, given the fact that how insightful, how dedicated and committed you are. Brian, are there any other questions from the audience?
There were a few. There was a specific one for Lil. You talked about earlier about challenges in mobilizing the government and service providers and addressing policy and structural change around issues of homelessness. What is the benefit of working instead at a grassroots level while advocacy happens simultaneously at different levels?
Yeah, such a good question. I spent a lot of my university degree studying this, so I have so many thoughts. But I think that one of the biggest points is there is enough money being put into service provision for homelessness that it shouldn't be a problem anymore. Like, government has put the funds there. They theoretically are there. The orgs are theoretically there. Service provision is theoretically there, but it isn't working. And from what I've observed and experienced and learned from people is that what's missing is not service provision. It's service provision that's based in dignity and humanization and trust. What's lacking is not like having enough food available for people. It's the human ways in which those services are structured and are being delivered. And it's that human element that's lacking. And that can't be systemized or provided at a federal or provincial level. That has to be developed at a grassroots level. You can't have a policy that dictates how you treat people that will result in people being treated just in a normal human way. And that's what's missing, I believe, for this still being a social problem. So doing the opposite and starting at the local level to figure out how to actually build one-on-one mutual relationships, I'm hoping if we can develop that, which can only be developed at a one-to-one level, can eventually build up in the relationships that are being developed. And when it can then meet the capabilities of the systemized service provision, then there's a chance that the situation improves. But that's why it's like so important to work at the localized level, is it's because it's the one-on-one human relations that are lacking and that are hurting in what's causing this social problem to continue, I think.
Thank you, Lil. How are you sharing practices, knowledge, and insight with your cohort, between you guys, between yourself? And somebody's working, Chama is working in Morocco, Ravia is in Edmonton, Chidera is in Ottawa, Lily is in Montreal, Shauna is in Johannesburg. The geography itself sometimes provides different perspective, different way of looking at things. Are you communicating amongst yourself, sharing experiences? Anyone?
Yeah, we have many opportunities to connect super regularly as a whole cohort, but we also are grouped off into triads where three of us can connect a little bit more frequently. And I think something that's been super helpful is just pulling out similarities between each of our initiatives. I think between Shama and I, both of us, at least initially, had a very strong youth focus. And then I find a lot of similarities between Dama and I's initiatives in that we're trying to offer visibility for local businesses and local knowledge holders or people with talents or skills and services that they have to offer the community. Yeah, there's always so many different similarities that we can pull out, and it's been helping us work through things because, like you said, each of us are in very different geographical regions of the world. So there's different contexts that come up, and sometimes seeing it from an entirely different perspective on very similar issues gets us the answers we need.
Let me switch gear here. The whole idea of our conversation today is also challenging hegemony and making it a relational framework. Within that relational framework, how do you see personal growth, your own growth? You see, growing and growing up are two different things. And I suspect over the last few months, you have been working with different communities of your choice. There is some aha moment, some moments you captured and say, this is beautiful, and so on and so forth. How do you see your personal growth in that regard? Damai, are you there?
Yeah.
How do you see your personal growth?
Well, there's a few different ways I feel like I could talk about this, but I might take a somewhat circuitous path, so bear with me for a sec. I think, I mean, I studied history, like I mentioned, in university, and it's something that I reflect on, especially in the past year. And in particular, with my relationship to my community as someone, like I said, who grew up very far removed from it. For a long time, it was unclear to me what this relationship was. And as I maybe alluded to a little earlier, like what part of this story of this, community I can claim as something that I belong to. And for me, I think a lot of it comes to this concept of memory, which I like to think of as maybe a more expansive way to think about history. Because when we talk about history, usually we just think about the academic pursuit, right? Like it's books, it's research articles, maybe it's some person in like a tweed jacket. But memory is something that exists, I guess, more ubiquitously. It exists not just in the way that we write down and tell stories orally, but it exists in the fabrics that we wear, in the ways in which we carry ourselves day to day, the food that we eat, and the ways our bodies exist in the world. And the way that I like to think about it is really who we are in terms of identity is just the aggregation of memory, right? It's the aggregation of all these experiences. And that doesn't mean who we are is just what we can remember. It's all of our experiences and our ancestors' experiences and all those predecessors that came before us, even if they're not related to us, as they live through our bodies today. And in a similar vein, I think really, of course, all of these come down to stories. So the reason I mention all this is because I think a lot of my growth personally in this fellowship has been really finding this place, this community that I have a sense of belonging that I feel like I have not had for a long time. And where that comes from for me is really recognizing that that connection and that part of me was always there. And it was always going to be there because, ever since I was conceived, and even before that, the path that my parents walked and my grandparents and so on, all of those came together into the memory that is stored within me today. And so, that, like I said, a very circuitous path to sort of answer the question. I don't even know if I answered it really.
Yes, you perfectly answered. You answered it very nicely, that the power of belonging and memory. What is the power of memory in our growth? A number of years ago, I was working somewhere in Africa, and a gentleman told me, when we sit under the tree for discussion, we are not using the tree as an umbrella, he said. The tree is part of the conversation because our ancestors' memories sit there. You see, that kind of wake up, connection, belonging, identity. There's a lot to unpack there. Charma.
Okay, so this is going to be a difficult question to answer because I'm going to answer it from the perspective of me working with youth. So I work mostly because we're doing dropout prevention, right? I work mostly with preteens and teens. The youngest one we're working with individually is 11 years old, and then the oldest one is about 15, and then there's a lot of ages in between. So I would say that because we're working with youth and that most of the questions that sometimes like they want to have these deep conversations, right? So what's the point of going to school? What do I do about my future? And we're trying to encourage them to follow their dreams and whatnot. There's a lot of conversations about life and about existing on this planet, et cetera, et cetera. And then in the midst of all of this, one of the keys of our program is the mentorship that goes between the adults and then the youth that is at a risk of leaving school. Some of the adults have left school and overcome that challenge. Some of them have been through school and whatnot. So within all of that, they're looking up to us. And so they see us really as adults that are normal, but also most of us are young adults and we're also trying to figure out our path. So I will say the personal growth that we're experiencing, at least me personally, this is a really interesting year. We're trying to do something together. There's a lot of leadership involved, etc. But we're also not leading by ourselves. We're doing like horizontal, circular leadership with the community, also inspiring youth, also mentoring. So yeah, a lot of responsibility, a little bit of pressure too.
Arawa, Chidera, personal growth.
Yeah, I think because Links to Locks is so focused on empowerment, and embracing self, embracing natural hair, I think that has led to a really important shift for me as well. I think that because I've had a little more room to engage in personal development, I was able to really prioritize connecting to my culture. I was able to take some Igbo language classes, and of course I was able to visit Nigeria and see my family. I think focusing on hair has also helped me grow an appreciation for my own hair. It's interesting because a lot of the time on Links to Locks, I'm talking about how important it is to embrace your natural hair, love your natural hair, appreciate yourself, take time to take care of your hair. But maybe I was falling a little short on that myself. So I've really been able to look within and start to prioritize these certain things more. And also in exploring how to integrate mental wellness into hair care, I've learned a lot about how hair is intrinsically tied to your mental health, particularly for the Black community, how hair is well beyond aesthetics. It's self-efficacy, it's how you express, it's your self-worth. And at the end of the day, you can feel super empowered, or it can have you feeling very down, depending on how you look at it. Yeah, I feel like I've grown a lot. I've definitely grown a lot.
Thank you, Chidera. We have. I'm trying to wrap up our conversation in the next 10-15 minutes, so those of you who woke up early in the morning can get a rest and coffee and regroup yourself. But let me ask you a general question to all of you. The question is this: we live in a very challenging time, challenging for many reasons. There is, as I said at the beginning of this discussion, there is a climate emergency happening. There are economic injustices. There are extreme politicized and institutionalized hate and dehumanization taking place. There is almost a depletion of hope. And we don't see hope as something we wait and it happens. How do you make hope happen at this time with your own initiative, with your own work, and instead of making this hope up there as a floating kind of idea? How do we advise the younger generation around the world today how they can make hope happen at a grassroots level than hope waiting and it will happen someday, just it will get better, they say some politicians. How do you make hope happen, and what's your advice for the younger generation around the world? Lil?
Yeah. What comes to my mind immediately is you have to create the spaces for it. That's most of what my initiative is like creating spaces for relationship building, for community building. But I think that you create spaces for hope and you learn what the like ingredients of that is. So it's going to involve like different people. It's going to involve like food and music and things that bring people joy. It's going to involve the conditions that people feel safe in that space. So they can leave, they have what they need, their needs are met. And this goes for like running workshops, running events, running service provision spaces, creating homes, creating like spaces with your friends. Like this goes for like work and leisure and anything. You have to like provide what's needed, provide what'll bring joy, provide people, provide all the ingredients that you have spaces where people are inclined to feel hope. You have to like intentionally make that meaning and make that space so that feelings of hope will develop and be felt by everybody and be shared.
Lil, thank you. It's not all dark. You can actually build joy while doing all those things, joyful spaces. That's what you're referring to. Chama?
So in my case, working with youth, a lot of them that are really at a dire risk of abandoning school struggle with the notion of hope and believe that there's no point in succeeding, that they're never going to be able to graduate, et cetera, et cetera. And after working with so many of them, I noticed that part of the reason they believe they think that is that unfortunately like academic grades are not showing up, and so for them academic grades equal self-worth at this point because the whole community around them says, well, you're not succeeding, you're never going to graduate, etc. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a defeatist mindset sometimes around these youth. And the whole key of the ISU initiative, aside from the play-based learning and whatnot, is ensuring that kids, the youth that is struggling with school, experiences success. Even if it's a small goal that is achieved, once it is achieved, their self-worth changes. They believe, they start to see themselves as capable, and they start believing that it's worth investing time into my education in this case, and then hoping that they will graduate, and the sky's the limit after that. So yeah, I'd say like it's also part of our responsibility as a community to invest in those youth and encourage them and push them to the forefront.
Thank you, Chama. Shona, how do you make hope happen?
I would say I'm not, I think, at all making hope happen in my initiative. Hope surrounds me at all times. I am working literally with organizations who have been around since the 50s and the 60s, who literally were working under conditions in the apartheid regime, who are being imprisoned every week, who are existing when it was illegal to exist. And so like working with partners like that who are such advocates and who have so much passion, they're always bringing hope. They have this vision of South Africa. The Constitution is a promise that they are very much following the roadmap too. And on the same time, my clients, people from, South Sudan, DRC, Somalia, like they have come here walking kilometers, running kilometers. Like hope is what has, brought them having their kids on their backs, just some luggage, leaving the only place that they might have known to come and see if there's opportunities and what kind of lives they can build here for themselves and their families. And so I think that, yes, law is part of my work, but I think we really work on hope most of the time in my initiative, and I'm lucky enough to not have to bring it, to just almost like I take it on. It's what really gets me to be so excited and supportive and keeps me going through everything, because I get it from everyone around me, and I'm super, super grateful about that.
Hope through resistance and action. That's what we learned from apartheid, anti-apartheid struggle. That's what you're bringing on. Action, resistance. Chidera, hope.
Yeah, I'd say the message that I would give to young people trying to action hope would be, honestly, to stop waiting and stop begging for change from people who aren't receptive, and trying to create that change in small ways yourself wherever possible. I think within the context of my initiative with Black Hair Care, people have been lobbying for ages for the government to make changes in the industry, in the certification process, for there to be more culturally affirming services in general. And things haven't really changed. But I realized that instead of hoping that, you know, existing services would expand to support Black clientele, I've realized that maybe this is an opportunity. People who are competent are out there. They're just not being seen. So instead of hoping that people in the Black community could find hairstylists who are able to help them, I'm literally mapping out where they can go. And instead of hoping that, you know, these businesses can make themselves more visible, I'm spotlighting them, I'm promoting them, I'm making sure that they are seen. And then with the mental health integration aspect of my initiative, I'm not just simply hoping that stylists can, you know, seek out knowledge on how to better support their clients. I'm trying to provide actual tools that allow service providers to be mental wellness advocates in their spaces. You know, and with the economic growth program, I'm not just simply hoping that Black women and girls learn how to take their skills and talents and make a little bit of income for themselves. I'm trying to give the tools to equip them to be successful entrepreneurs. And yeah, I guess it's just, like I said before, sometimes it seems like there's this really big problem, but at least from my experience, it's been an opportunity. Yes, we can't go to just anywhere to get our hair done, but I've realized that we are the ones offering the services. Other Black-owned businesses are offering the services that we're seeking. Let's just connect to them better. They're there. We just have to find them. Yeah.
Hope doesn't happen because we hope. Hope happens because we act. That's the message from Kidera. Ravia?
That is actually exactly like my, I guess what I've learned as well. Action versus sitting on your phone, maybe. I think a lot of the hopelessness I've heard and experienced has been from media consumption and all of that, which is fair, rightfully so, because the media is telling you these things that are happening. But I think the real like tangible parts of the hope are actually that connection, and through that conversation, that when you are able to bring people together, like I know it sounds so cliche almost because it seems so simple, but when you're actually bringing people together to have conversations and meeting the needs or the wants of a community, and you're able to like have conversations about things you care about, you garner a sense of hope in just like being together, like first of all, and then second, like identifying and working towards those goals, versus like I think a lot of hopelessness comes from like um a lot of information and no direction, and like finding a direction and figuring out what information is actually valuable to that direction and working towards it is like the most helpful.
Thank you, Ravia. The last two questions are these. The first one is, there are younger graduates in this country listening to your reflections, watching, listening, and learning what you have shared. What is your advice in terms of accessing these kind of opportunities, these kind of chances where they can get involved in their community? And what are the key messages you can share for those who are listening in, whether it's from Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver or Victoria or Edmonton? Ravia, what would you share? What would you advise them?
I would say like listening. I think actually what Shona said, like humbly approaching your community and listening is like the first step to getting involved, figuring out what is relevant to your context, and as well taking feedback. Like that's something I've had to like learn, but also something I've experienced while working with other organizations is the differences between those who listen to the participants and the people that they're working with versus those who are maybe listening to funders. But also I think like if you're trying to get more involved, like just reaching out and saying hi, like DMing people on Instagram is like fine. Like it's usually fine unless they're like email them. Like reaching out to people seems scary, seems weird, but it actually does work. Shama is the networking queen, so she probably knows more about that. But yeah, I think like just meeting people, like yeah, open, like yeah, approaching with like an open mind and is good.
Any advice, Damai?
Well, this is my genuine advice, but it's going to sound maybe a little straightforward. But honestly, just go outside and do something. And actually, this is what I had on my mind when we were talking about hope. And this is what I brought into my community is that what it comes down to for me really is the question basically to people, how many people do you know, I guess, dance when they feel completely hopeless? Because in my experience in my community, I didn't know what I was doing when I was going to get there exactly. I had an idea that I wanted to do something, maybe digital tourism. But really what I started with was not any of that really. It was just going outside and going to do things with the community. And what it is for me is that, for example, on the topic of hope, is when people are dancing, specifically when they're dancing together, let's say it's for an event or maybe it's just for fun or something, but what they are saying is that we are dancing now, we are being a village right now, and perhaps we will do that tomorrow too. And so for me, like I am not a dancer, at least professionally speaking. But for me, something like dance and something like singing as well, these are just human activities. And this is why I don't like it when people say, oh, I wish I could sing. I wish I was a singer or an artist or whatever it may be. No, you don't have to do that. You just have to have a voice. You have to have that and be willing to share it with other people. You can do it by yourself too, of course, but there's something that is added when you're doing it together with others. So this is my advice, at the very least, is to just go outside, go be a person in a community with some other people. And I do specifically highly recommend going to go dance with other people.
Shona?
Sorry. I was gonna say I think it's a bit hard to follow all of that. But I guess the thing that keeps coming back to me and the things that we keep talking, and I think my kind of concluding thoughts on all of this, because I think most of my colleagues, of my friends, of my peers have expressed a lot of what I already feel. But I'm so grateful to Pathy and this fellowship to give me the time for myself and also for the community I work with to be able to take risks and to build relationships that in, you could say, the normal status quo of things we often forget to do because we are so driven by outcomes and life happens and everyone always says they're too busy. And I think there's been just such an appreciation during this time to take things slowly, to allow yourself to take things slowly and to almost check yourself sometimes when you're trying to run fast and wild with things, because yes, you're excited and you're passionate, but to realize that it's better to do something well and for it to take so much more time than to do something now, and that it doesn't do what people need it to do. And so that's just been my biggest appreciation. And maybe it's because I come from law school where time is a very valued commodity that we could say put a number on, in the sense of like, I have this many hours to study this and this, I need to do it by next week. And as lawyers, we bill by our times, you know, every 7 minutes, you're going to be charged, you know, $50 or $100 based off of the type of lawyer you get. And so being able to live time fully has I think opened to me a way that I want to live and that I want to exercise the law in the future and even currently, that I had never realized was just such an incredible and important part of just living, a bit what Damai was saying, you know, just being in the present is something that we don't oftentimes get to experience fully. And so, yes, those are my reflections, I guess. It's maybe not answering exactly your question, but I think it's how I would like to end this, my contribution to this panel.
Self-discovery and self-acknowledgement. That's what Damai and you're talking about. We are meant to dance and sing and have fun. You know, it's not that somebody calling you, going through some kind of competition and discovering whether you can dance and sing. But we are made to sing and dance, and that's precisely an important point of being in this world. Shauna touched on one of the questions I was hoping to pose to all of you, which is this fellowship, even this conversation we're having today, is made possible by Pathy Family Foundation. They supported your initiative and individual initiatives, and they also, if it wasn't for that, we won't be gathering and sitting here having conversation. There are two dimensions to my question. The challenges we're facing today in terms of institutional and government-supported fundings, philanthropy is this kind of generous support is playing a key role around the world. And given that fact, what are your final words for the Pathy Family Foundation you would like to share? Shauna already shared her view, her thankfulness and gratefulness. Let me go to Chama, and what is your message to the Pathy Foundation and the importance of this funding?
My message to the Pathy family is thank you so much for investing in youth leadership. So it's unheard of, at least as far as I know, within the Canada landscape, where there's a call, a national call, where they ask you, what would you do with $40,000 and now the funding has increased with your community? So dream big, what it is that you want to do, and just tell us, and then we'll see if we'll grant you the funding or not. And then giving us complete freedom on how to execute that and how to grow as leaders. So I was reflecting during the summer. I was telling myself it takes a special kind of person to dedicate a fund for youth leadership, where they're investing in youth leaders so that they invest into their own communities, versus investing directly into the community or investing in a scholarship, for example. Thank you so much to the Pathy family for this very, very special once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
Lil?
Yeah, thank you for valuing us as much as our work and valuing us instead of just our initiative. It's like quite a framework shift for funding and for any like job. To tell you, and like I've been told directly, like we want you to prioritize your rest and your well-being equally, if not above, to the work that you're doing. That's crazy. Some crazy anti-capitalist stuff right there. And it's what's actually needed, I think, to like improve how development work is done. Because if I'm not feeling myself, I can't do work that's good, that's authentic, and that's full, and that's present, and thus ends up being positive for people. So yeah, thanks for wanting us to take care of ourselves as much as we want to take care of a community.
Damai, message for Pathy family?
Yeah, well, when I've been planning my initiative throughout the past year, I think a lot of times I kind of came to this model, like the ideal situation would be I just give the resources that I have in this fellowship to local leaders, and then they know what to do with it. And that's exactly what Pathy is. And I think the model is something that, really, as far as I know, is one of a kind, especially in Canada. And the opportunity for professional growth and making an impact and personal growth for all the fellows is really something that you can never, well, I don't want to say never, but at this time, you cannot really find in many other places. So I also just would like to express my gratitude for those of you who are students watching. Maybe consider applying.
Thank you. Ravia?
Yeah, I'd like to say the same things as everyone has kind of wrapped it up, like the opportunity to the time opportunity and the agency that like a community is given to make their own decisions through the Pathy Fellowship, like parameters of funding is so unique to the Pathy Family Foundation and the fellowship. I've been in many situations where you find development nonprofit sector changing their programming for funding goals. You find a grant and you say, oh, okay, maybe we can work on this, but it's not necessarily the actual like mission of the organization or the community they're working with. So this is really like, I think it's actually solving that huge issue that exists across the world and something that I continue to see in the nonprofit sector.
Thank you. Chidera, and last message for Pathy family.
Yes, of course, a huge thank you. I'm so grateful for this opportunity. I think this investment in youth empowerment is priceless. Obviously, there's 6 of us in this cohort, but the Pathy Family Foundation putting so much value on us, having so much faith in us, allowing us the autonomy to take on our initiatives entirely on our own, without having to follow any narrow constraints, just being able to entirely trust ourselves. It empowers us as leaders to make change in the world, but for every young person watching, I think that changes their ideas too about how far they can make change or how much impact they can have. People see us, I'm only 22 and I'm able to do these certain things, and people are watching and they can realize that, hey, I think I could do this too. And it's helping youth see that if you have an idea to make change in your world, it's not just going to go unsupported. There are people out there willing to support you in that journey so that you can realize change. You can action change. And I think that is so priceless. So thank you for investing not just in youth leadership, but in a general empowerment. I remember in the classroom back in Nova Scotia, we got to put a pin on the map for where our initiative was taking place. And there are pins all over the world. And for each one of those fellows, they interacted with how many different young people or people of all ages. So this impact is so widespread, well beyond Canada. Priceless. Thank you.
Thank you, Chidera. In the middle of our conversation, I asked you a question about personal growth, but it's actually the other way around. You help us grow up in your work, in your reflection, in your insights. And this is the favorite part of my work, engaging with the young people in different parts of the world and learning and absorbing what you are doing and how committed you are. In this bleak moment, there's nothing I could do better than sitting and listening to you, generating hope for all of us. And I'm very grateful for your work, for your contribution. Today's session was made possible by our communications people, Brian, who was facilitating earlier, Pathy fellow staff members, Jess, Courtney, and Aubrey. They have been working diligently day and night to make sure that you get all the support you need during the course of your appointment. As I said earlier, I could keep this going for hours and for towards the end of the day, and because what you're sharing with us is delicious, it's beautiful, it's empowering, it's enriching. So I look forward to seeing you back in Canada in July, some of you who are outside the country, and I look forward to learning and listening again. It's not easy for me to cut the microphone and get to the other part of our work, but we have a limited time. And thank you so much. Thank you in your journey, sharing your journey with us, and also just being present. You know, Dam might talk about dancing. Go out and dance, with your community. Do joyful things, and these kind of things weigh heavy sometimes on you. So make it a joyful experience. And once again, I look forward to seeing you back home in Canada. And that's all we have for today. And thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.